My friends, welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. My friends, this is probably going to get me into some hot water, but at this point, I care not. Volodymyr Zelensky, however you say the man's name, has been met with cries of heroism by many people. I've covered the hero worship aspect of this in the last video, and I have no interest in covering the hero worship aspect of this anymore. I'm just going to tell you guys exactly how I feel about this man, because I'm getting sick and tired of people using the principle of proximity to associate Zelensky and all of his views with the necessary survival of the Ukrainian people. If any of you had respect, people who are doing this, not people who are not doing this, but if any of you who do this and who grovel at the feet of Zelensky had any respect for the Ukrainian people, you would have the good sense and the good moral nature to consider them as individuals and not as pawns or not as servants and subjects to one man's goals and not as the cells in the body of one man's country. Every Ukrainian is an individual, and every Ukrainian should have a conscience to speak for themselves, and Zelensky should not be a stand-in for how they feel about what's going on in their country. That is my point. Now, I wish Zelensky felt like that, because right when the invasion started, this is one of the reasons why I can't stand him, Zelensky forced men 18 and older to stay in the country and die for his country, to die for his cause, to die. And here's another thing, my friends. You don't have an obligation to die for your country. You can choose to do so. And in some cases, it may be a noble goal to do so. But you have an obligation to no one but your own self-preservation, those who are close to you, who you care about, who you consort with, and your fellow man in some limited cases, such as being kind to him, not taking his stuff, not harming him in his life. In all other cases, you have no obligation to go and die for a war that you may not want to die for, or you may not believe in. None whatsoever. I don't care what the merits of the war are. Obviously, the Ukrainians are fighting for their lives. Obviously, Putin is a bad actor. Obviously, these things should be unsaid. Obviously. But Zelensky thought that young men in his country have an obligation to go ahead and die at his command if he wants them to. That is not morally correct. It is not logically sound whatsoever. It is simply another example of proximity. You're close to this thing, I command this thing, therefore I command you. It's bonkers logic that so many people are uncritically accepting. And unfortunately, Zelensky has taken his morally skewed idea of obligation to the nations. In his little virtual tour, Zelensky went to, again, the Bundestag, the German Bundestag, and basically said that my country is experiencing a Holocaust, which is not accurate whatsoever. Yes, Ukrainians are dying, but the Holocaust is a very special event that has a very particular significance in history that should not be used willy-nilly for the political and rhetorical goals of some comedian turned president. It's disgusting. And then Zelensky went ahead into the United States and had the gall to bring up 9/11 to manipulate lawmakers into giving his country more than we've already given him. We've given Zelensky over $3.4 billion already in defense funding. We've been funding Ukraine 14.6, maybe even more than that billion since the Crimea annexation. How much more do you want? And how much more do you want? How much more do you want? How much more money? And we're in the middle of an economic crisis. How much more do you want? Then he goes to Canada and says, well, imagine if these were your children being killed. He is basically using emotional manipulation to get his goals. And if your goals stand on solid ground, if your goals are endemic to the truth, then why in the world should you have to manipulate people to get to your ends? Then, of course, Zelensky also said, if you don't put a no-fly zone over Ukraine, you're an accomplice to terror. So essentially, if you don't do what he says, which could also cause a massive war that could be the end of humanity, you're an accomplice to terror. He went to Israel and said you cannot mediate between good and evil. Well, the Israel Prime Minister tried to mediate between him and Vladimir Putin to create a peace deal, but he says you cannot mediate between good and evil. So obviously, he views any attempt at peace as a compromise with evil and therefore unacceptable. And yet Zelensky himself is going ahead and engaging in peace negotiations with Russia. So is he compromising with evil as well? Do you guys understand how absurd all of this is? Do you understand how this sort of status of Zelensky as this sort of purveyor of virtue is ridiculous? Do you understand how trying to morally manipulate countries and using these broad abstractions as a stand-in for pure logic and truth is absolutely vile? Do you understand this, guys? Do you get it? I am so sick of sitting here and having to be told that if I even critique Zelensky once, I'm some kind of Russian disinfo agent. I don't like Putin. I don't like what Putin's done. I've never liked Putin. I've never liked his draconian laws. I've never liked his disrespect of the press. I've never liked his immense traditionalism. I've never liked him. I don't like his intellectual forefather. I don't like Dugin. I don't like any of them. But I also don't like a politician which uses, in some cases, the same tactics as Putin to suppress his opposition and then to conform things to his will, because Zelensky also shut down all opposition newspapers in Ukraine very recently, and yet we're going to just ignore that because of Zelensky. This is a man who adopts Eastern European political tactics, but uses Western principles to push his ideas. He couches Eastern European political tactics, which have nothing to do with liberty, which have nothing to do with individualism, and then couches it in language of democracy to make himself seem more marketable to the gullible masses willing to listen to him. And people are falling for it. We've got to be more willing to reckon with our heroes. We've got to be more willing to kill our darlings. We've got to be more willing to ask ourselves if someone's a hero in the first place. We've got to be more willing to do so much more, to take more steps in our thought processes, people. Because if we don't, there's so much at stake. The continued existence of liberty, the maintenance of sound government policy structures, all of these things are at stake if we don't get ourselves together. I'm not talking about everybody. I'm talking about the people who I mentioned in this video, who are being apologists for Zelensky, who are associating all of his detractors with Russia, who are overlooking his flaws and using the plight of an entire people to justify his flaws. That's wrong. It's not correct in any sense. And this blind idolatry leads nowhere but to slaughter. Whether it be the slaughter of actual people, in the case of Ukraine, or whether it be the slaughter of reality and of first principles, in the case of Zelensky, and how he is manipulating people or trying to manipulate people to bend to his will. It's not okay. It's never okay. It's not okay when Putin does it. Not okay when Zelensky does it. Think on it. My friends, love you guys so much. If you love me, you know where you can get me at. You can go on my Patreon. You can go to my PayPal, which is going to be official, cwatson@gmail.com. You can like, share, subscribe to this video, or this channel, and subscribe and share this video. You can join my Discord, which is in the comment section down below. I love you guys so much, and please stay balanced. Bye.